Hello everybody. Weighted average cost of capital. This is a very basic and very important type of problem under the unit called as capital structure, in which we are mainly concerned about the overall cost of capital. When we talk about the weighted average cost of capital, the term weighted average itself means that we are over here giving appropriate weightages to each type of capital. When we say each type of capital, it is like every company is having a mix of various types of capital. It includes the equity shares, it includes preference shares, it includes debentures, it includes term loans, retained earnings, or even any other sort of hybrid capital. So when all these types of capitals exist in the overall capital structure of the company, each capital has got a different cost. The cost of debt, cost of equity, cost of term loans or preference shares would be surely different. When these costs are different from one another, and of course the proportion, again, all the types of capital are not in the same proportion. What do we mean by this is the equity component is not equal to your debt component, or the own funds component is not always equal to your borrowed component, and that is why the weightage of the percentage of composition of the capital structure should be given while calculating the average cost of capital. So in this, what is done is the average cost, rather the average weighted average of all types of costs of capital is taken into consideration. And how it is done, that we'll see from this very simple, short, yet very effective numerical. See, the numerical is very simple. A company wants to have an optimum mix of debt and equity capital. So there are two options available with them, debt or debt and equity. And the company is trying to identify which is the best possible form of capital structure. The cost of debt and equity at different debt to equity ratio are as follows. What is the optimum capital structure of the company? Yes, so they have given over here various debt equity ratios, various combinations of debt and equity. In this debt equity ratio, it means the composition of debt as well as equity. The first case over here, when the company goes for 100% equity, see there is no ratio. What does it mean is that, and there is only cost of equity. It means that the company is going with 100% equity. The overall cost of equity is 12.5%. Cost of debt is not there. But when the company is going for 10:90, that is debt equity ratio, which means out of the total capital, 10% would be debt or borrowed funds and 90% would be owned funds. Then in this case, the cost of debt would be 0.05. That means it is 5%. Because this is 5%, it has been converted into decimal form, that is 0.05. And the same thing over here, cost of equity would be 13%. 20:80, when the proportion is 20:80, this is 0.05, it is 13.6. These are the costs, these are all the cost of debts and these are all the cost of equity. When it is 30:70, it would be 0.06 and 14.3. As the proportion of debt is increasing, the cost of debt is also increasing. Yes, when it is 60:40, cost of debt is 10%, whereas cost of equity is 20%. Yes, so this is the numerical, the question, the problem. Now let us move towards its solution. To calculate, so the calculation of weighted average cost of capital. These are the three columns which are already given to us. You have the debt equity ratio, you have the post-tax cost of debt, and this is the cost of equity. Now, how do we calculate the combined costs or the weighted average cost of capital? The formula is very simple. What we have to do is, we have to multiply the weightage of each type of capital to its cost. Like in case of this 10:90, the cost of debt is 0.05% or rather 5%, and the proportion is 10%. So it is like 10% multiplied by 5%. So what does it mean? 10% is 0.1 multiplied by the cost. So this is the proportion of debt multiplied by cost of debt plus proportion of equity is 90%. So this is 0.90 multiplied by cost of debt, that is 13%. So the formula becomes very simple. Proportion of debt multiplied by cost of debt plus proportion of equity multiplied by cost of equity. When you combine this together, it forms 12.2%. It forms 12.2%. So when you add them all, you get 12.2. What is this 12.2? This is the overall weighted average cost of capital when the debt equity ratio is 10:90. These are all different alternatives that the company is considering, and we have to identify which is the best or rather optimum mix of capital structure that will fetch least weighted average cost of capital. Coming to 2080, proportion is 20%, so it's 0.2, cost is 0.05, plus cost of proportion of equity is 80%, so 0.8, multiplied by cost of equity 13.6, that is 0.136. So multiplied you get 11.88. When it was 30/70, cost of debt is 0.06, so it is 30% means 0.30 multiplied by cost of debt plus proportion of equity 70% multiplied by cost of equity. Add them together, you get 11.81. 40/60, cost of debt becomes 7% and cost of equity becomes 16%. So proportion of debt 40% multiplied by cost of debt, that's 7% plus proportion of equity 60% multiplied by cost of equity 16%. Together is 12.4%. When we similarly do it for 50/50 and 60/40, we get 13% and 14% respectively. Now since we have got all these combined costs, we need to identify at which debt equity ratio is the cost of capital, combined cost of capital minimum. And that is what we find over here. 11.81 is the least possible cost of capital, weighted average cost of capital. So this means that if the company goes with a proportion of 30:70, that is 30:70 debt equity ratio, the company would get benefited because the overall cost of capital is minimum, that is 11.81 for the debt equity ratio of 30:70. So you can conclude that from the above table, at a combination of 30:70 debt equity ratio, the aggregate cost of capital is minimum and therefore it is an optimum capital structure. So what is the optimum capital structure over here? It is 30:70 based on the combined cost of capital. Yes, so this is the way by which we can calculate the weighted average cost of capital, also called as the combined cost of capital. Yes, thank you.